Hello again everyone, hope this video finds you well. Today's video is about a cross-country trip we took to Telluride, Colorado and the Citabria back in May of 2021. We approached Telluride from the south following State Route 145 at 12,000 feet before finally slipping between Mount Wilson to our west and Silver Mountain to our east. Telluride has always been on my flying bucket list, and while not the highest elevation airport in the lower 48, it takes the number 2 spot at an altitude of 9,070 feet. Only Leadville, Colorado tops it at 9,934 feet. Prior to this flight, we had landed at the lowest airport in the U.S., Furnace Creek in Death Valley at minus 210 feet in a tri-pacer. That video is actually showcased over at the Bold Method website, and I'll link it at the end of this video. And later in May, we landed at the highest turf-only airport, Copper Basin in McKay, Idaho in the Citabria. That field sits at 7,920 feet. This was sort of a shakeout flight to see how the Citabria would perform during a long leg cross-country and in a mountainous environment in preparation for our big Idaho trip, which was planned for later that month. We took advantage of a really nice tailwind. We were able to cover the 326 nautical miles from Phoenix non-stop in just under 3 hours. This would come back to bite us when we returned to Phoenix later that day. Telluride is a non-towered airport and was pretty quiet at the time of our arrival around 10:30 a.m. local. We set up for a right downwind to runway 9. We are very fortunate to have excellent VFR conditions for the trip. Winds forecast at Telluride, usually strong and gusty, were forecast to be less than 10 knots. I would not recommend flying to Telluride or in and around the mountains if wind speed exceeds 20 knots due to the dangerous turbulence and downdrafts that can occur. Early May temperatures were also still on the cool side, which meant density altitude would not be a major factor. Both winds and density altitude are what make Telluride such a challenging airport to fly in and out of. The approach end is sheer cliff face. This type of setup can be dangerous in strong winds, as it can be an area of potential downdrafts when an airplane is at its most vulnerable, low and slow on short final. The way to mitigate that is to fly a high approach and land long. There's really no reason not to fly a high approach and land long in a small single-engine plane at Telluride, as the runway is 7,111 feet long and there are no taxi exits until the very end of the runway. This was a pretty crappy landing. I floated for days and then dropped it in. As usual, GoPro does not capture how bad it actually was. Now here's where things get real interesting. After clearing the runway, I began to pull the power back to idle. But apparently I had leaned the fuel-injected Lycoming 320 too much for the altitude that we were at, because the engine quit on me. And attempting to restart of a hot fuel-injected engine can be problematic, if not downright frustrating, as many of you who own these engines know. I also noticed after watching the video that it sounds like the aux fuel pump might be on. If that is the case, then the engine is never going to restart, and I'm probably lucky that I did not catch it on fire. On this day, there was no restarting, so we just had to push it into the chocks. Just a little embarrassing. Fortunately, no one around to laugh at us except the lineman. One of the linemen was surprised to see a Citabria at the airport. Personally, I don't see this airport as being a stretch for the capabilities of the airplane. Maybe Turbo Cirrus owners do. Unfortunately, that little incident spoiled the rest of the visit because in the back of my mind, I was not sure if we had a bona fide engine problem and if the engine would even restart for the flight home. The weather was going to worsen later in the day and snow was forecast that evening and into the next day. I did not want to be stuck in Telluride. That would be very costly. We borrowed the crew car from the nice folks at the FBO and explored the mining town for a few hours before catching a bite to eat and then heading back to the airport. I felt a little like Chevy Chase in National Lampoon's Vacation when they visited the Grand Canyon. We spent all this time flying here only to spend a few hours on the ground. You can see in the next two photos how quickly the weather was changing from the time we landed until just before our departure. Here is the sky when we landed, and here is the sky prior to takeoff. Well, after all the worrying, she started right up on the first try, and we are on our way, this time taking off on 27 and following the valley out of the mountains to the west. It ended up taking us 5 hours of flying to get home, with a fuel stop in the middle, thanks to the strong winds aloft out of the west. Well, Telluride is marked off the bucket list. Now it's on to Leadville. Hope you enjoyed the video. Till next time, see ya!